All right. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. Good very early morning if you're joining us from somewhere else. Thank you all for being here today, and thanks again to the organizers for setting up this great panel. Thanks to President Rich Davey for laying out the lay of the land. I think the keynote really sets up a very good ground for us to start this panel on innovations in transit. Moji did a phenomenal work of organizing folks on this panel, so I'll give Moji the chance to introduce the panel, and then we'll take it on from there.
So thank you everybody for attending this event. I hope that we'll have a day full of fun and learnings. It has already started great with the keynote speech. Today at this panel, we're going to have a very brief introduction and Q&A, then taken care of by the moderator. And at the last 10 minutes, we are aiming to take questions from the audience. So feel free to put any questions that you might have into the Q&A. In this panel, we have Ritesh Varaday, the General Manager of Transit at Swiftly. We have Andreas Ferrer, the Chief Innovation Officer of SPB in Switzerland. We have Gabriel Sanchez-Martinez from Corbato, and an MIT Transit Lab alumni. We have Marcel Porras, the Deputy Chief Innovation Officer of LA Metro. And we also have Nina King, the Tech Lead at LA Metro. So I'm going to give the stage to Evad to start the exciting conversation.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Moji. And thanks again to the panelists for being here. So just to set out, again, the lay of the land, I want to divide this panel into three main themes, and we will go through those, and hopefully those will engage the audience in some interesting Q&A after. First, we'd like to get everyone's understanding of what innovation and what transit innovation is, just based on everyone's roles and everyone's experience. Then we want to discuss about the role of public-private partnerships. I think we have an excellent mix of public and private sector folks on this panel, so that would be great. And finally, we want to talk about the role of innovation as it pertains to the public perception of transit. So as it pertains to things like encouraging further investment in transit, but also getting and retaining talent to work in transit in line to the president's speech right before this panel. So first things first, in no particular order, just in the order of the folks in the list. I will start with you, Andreas. Andreas, can you tell us a little bit about what constitutes as public transit innovation in your sphere, and if you have any particular great example of that from your experience?
Thanks very much. Yes. Coming back to what Rich said the other moment, that the main goals are to be fast, clean, and safe. That's a little bit the starting point where we started. Public transportation in Switzerland is already quite fast, very reliable, very dense. It's clean. Our slogan is "On the way at home." That's how you should feel when you're sitting in a train, for example, and it's safe as well. So that's, of course, you can always get better and better in these dimensions as well. That's what we're working on, that we're working hard on with digitalization behind the scenes, traffic management, for example, allowing even more dense traffic and so on. But what's now the challenge of innovation is becoming enhancing the customer perspective, the ease of use of public transportation, making it as easy to use public transportation as making a phone call, and flexibility. The way people live every day is more and more fluid since COVID. Not every day is the same. It's not the same whether the weather is good or bad. So flexibility and ease of use, that's what we're working on with our channels, how people, for example, use public transportation.
Excellent. This is great. So from the Swiss perspective to an American angle, if you can give us that, Marcel, how that translates into LA Metro and your experience in innovation in public transit.
Yeah, I think I echo the statement about leveraging innovation and technology, and specifically right now at this moment in time, to enhance the customer experience, right? To really look at a combination of things, right? How do we attract new riders? And I think for Los Angeles, which is continuing to grow its system and is many times referred to as the car capital of the world, right? I think I think we have to continue to really focus on while we attract new riders, but also like continuing to respect and uplift the voices of those riders who make up the backbone of our system, right? And for those of you who haven't been to Los Angeles recently, or only think about Los Angeles through the eyes of like the Walk of Fame or Venice Beach, I think we are, have so many different communities, right? We have like the largest diasporas of like Thailand, Mexico, Cambodia, Armenia, Vietnam in the region, right? And so I think, looking at how do you continue to take advantage of that cultural richness, right? Because if you think that if you could pilot something here in Los Angeles, you could potentially pilot it in the world, right? And so I think also one of the things that Los Angeles has as its advantage is that we're a very large market, and so it gives us a lot of negotiating power, I think, with companies to really come and test and pilot their innovations here. I think also if you have just been tracking the state of mega events, and Los Angeles continues to attract these major events. FIFA World Cup, we're going to have eight games. The Summer Olympics and Paralympics games in 2028. We hosted a Super Bowl previously. We're going to host another Super Bowl in 2027. And so how do you also take advantage of these moments to really continue to try new things and to continue to iterate off of them? I think it's, I think nationally, we all saw the uptick of, the Taylor Swift phenomenon in transit. And I think in real time, and because we had been tracking what was happening and had been engaged with other transit agencies across the country, you saw real-time developments of our system, promoting bus-only lanes, adding new buses, trying to kind of engage the system. And so, we're excited, right? I wouldn't say that we are the leaders in kind of a lot of the transportation technology things, but I think we're definitely open and looking at how do we continue to move in that direction, particularly with the upcoming opportunities that we see in front of us.
This is great. Thanks, Marcel. So I'll take that to Ritesh. I think it's great seeing kind of like the public sector eye in this, whether it's from Switzerland or from LA. But Ritesh, tell us a little bit about innovation in transit from a private sector perspective, and what is there, what is the value that it brings to a company like Swiftly, or to your previous experiences, and why do you find this an attractive opportunity as well?
Definitely, and I'm a huge fan of both the Swiss experience as well as Los Angeles transit. I think about transit, and the best thing we can do is have fast, frequent, reliable service. That is the perspective of, if we can get people to where they want without having to even think too much about it, that's the best experience we can give them. From the rider perspective, I think innovation is anything that makes transit easy, understandable, legible, and non-intimidating. That is a barrier that we on the transit side need to cross, because frankly, it's kind of easy to get in a car and go somewhere. It sometimes feels a little more daunting to do that on a vehicle that you do not control, that you have to figure out how to use. From the private sector perspective, I think the innovations that a company such as Swiftly, but a lot of others can do, is help agencies meet those goals of providing fast, frequent, reliable service and make the system easy, understandable, legible, and non-intimidating. Especially using technology and data to improve the rider experience. to give better information to passengers. From the private sector perspective, one of the interesting things is, again, if you contrast the public and the private sector perspective, on the public sector, you are working in Los Angeles, or you're working in Switzerland, you're working in a locality, however big or small that is, and you are very attuned to the needs of your riding public. From the private sector perspective, you get to see lots of agencies. You get to see lots of different nuances, but also a lot of commonality. And one of my favorite sayings is every bus system is very similar. Every rail system is its own unique snowflake. Buses are on streets. Streets are sometimes not controlled by the transit agency. They all have to go through traffic signals and be affected by traffic. Things that a private sector company can do is understand how can good information, good data, more reliable service be provided in one context, and how can that innovation be brought not just to that agency, but to every other agency around the world. And that's really one of the crucial things that private sector companies such as Swiftly do in this space.
Nice. This is great. And to the point about good data and innovation using good data, I think Nina and Gabrielle can speak a lot to that. So I'll put them on the spot for this. So we'll start with Gabrielle. Gabrielle Corbato uses a lot of data and generates a lot of data. As a recent convert from traffic flow theory, a lot of car research into transit research, I think in the last 2 years, one thing I came to admire quite a bit about transit is the availability of data and the standardization of that. So tell us a little bit about the advantages that brings to Corbato's work, and if you see any kind of new trends emerging in this field of data and data standardization, and how that applies to generating, information both for the passengers and for the agencies you work with.
Sure, thank you. Innovation in this area, I think, can be seen in all areas that connect with public transportation, from data collection and analysis, which is more what we're talking about today, to obviously service and operations planning, which is what more directly achieves the improvements in service that Ritesh was talking about, right? Making service reliable and easy to understand, and a high quality experience, but also to real-time control and contracting. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to innovate, and data can, you'll see innovation relating to data in all of these areas. At Corbato, we focus on innovation in the analytics area to support the strategic decision-making at agencies. So I think what we've seen, what we've noticed is that many agencies lack a good view into how people use their system, and how they experience that service that is being offered. And so we're all trying to, serve a public and understand where people are coming from and going to, and to improve service quality. But it's important, therefore, to know where people want to come from and go to, and how what their quality of service is as they experience it. So our mission, therefore, is to empower the decision makers at agencies with that information, so that they can drive those improvements. You talked about, you asked about giving an example, bring one example that we recently worked on in partnership with WMATA in Washington, D.C., and with several private companies, including IBI, back when Ritesh was part of that team, Foursquare, EBP. Washington, D.C., WMATA was modeling their riders as all one homogeneous group, and we know that's not the case. Some people use transit occasionally. Some people rely on it for their commutes. There are different behaviors that you'll see depending on their socioeconomic status. And so when you're faced with, as an agency, when you're faced with trying to improve transit in some regard, maybe it's a fare policy decision, maybe it's a service planning decision, these different groups will behave differently, right? So we worked together with Washington, D.C. To essentially segment the riders according to their travel patterns. And that gave WMATA a much better understanding of their customers. And in the future, when WMATA is trying to model the impact of any kind of fare change or service change, they'll be able to be more precise and accurate about how the different groups will be affected, and that ties to social equity, it ties to revenue from the fares, it ties to how service quality will be experienced. Yeah, so that's kind of an example of the kind of work we do. And you talked about data standards as well. I don't know if there's a bunch. I don't know what area you want to get into, but I think the data standards, just to summarize in one sentence, I think they do two things. They allow agencies to share advances in technology and innovation, right? Because what's interesting about agencies is that they don't compete with each other. So, but they often don't also. They have no reason to hide, keep secrets from each other. But it's kind of hard to work together with other agencies. And part of that problem, there are many reasons for that, but part of the problem is that the data are all different at different agencies. And so data standards allow one agency to develop some technology, maybe by themselves, maybe in partnership with the private sector, and then to share some of that. And that sharing can happen in many different ways. It could be direct, it could be through conferences or events like this. It could be through a private partner, a consulting group that has consulted with one agency, and then those learned lessons and experiences can be then more efficiently translated or transferred to another agency. And I think another important and often overlooked area of data standards is that in developing and maintaining those standards, you bring a lot of people to the table from different agencies, different parts of the world, to all talk about that. And those areas, those forums are rare, to bring people from different agencies to talk about the same topic and figure out the problems and put their minds together. And I think that is an important driver of innovation too.
This is a great point, and I think it ties to Ritesh's earlier point about folks do face similar problems even if they don't know it, or the systems are special but very similar in a lot of ways. So that's definitely great. I think in our work at MIT with Transit Lab and through the Transit Consortium, once we have those events, we see the same things. We see people looking at other people from different agencies and be like, oh, it's facing the same problem, and we're trying to do this. And it's those conversations that really, again, spark and drive innovation. I'll pass it to Nina, because Nina, you work kind of on both sides. So put both hats, put your LA Metro hat and your mobility data hat, and tell us a little bit about, again, the role of data in driving the innovation, and then how this is shared across agencies and to customers as well.
Yeah, no, this is a great topic, and it's like so important to me, being at LA Metro, but also in my role on the board of mobility data. And part of it is not just having a data standard, but the fact that the primary data standard in which I deal with, which is GTFS, that it is free and open. As an open data standard, everyone has access to learn it, to use it. You remove barriers for everyone to end up speaking the same language, whether you're on the public side or the private side, and you're able to build on each other's work. And coming from a background in software development, I'm a huge proponent of free and open source software to promote innovation. And I think that's absolutely fundamental and key. So the way that GTFS developed, being free and open to use, I think plays a huge role. And to Gabriel's point about public transit agencies and how we don't compete with each other, absolutely true. That plays a huge role as well, because we can publish our data without a lot of complaint. There's not really much one can say about oh, no, we shouldn't publish that data. It's our service. And in a lot of government areas, I've seen, publishing data is a huge barrier to getting any data out there so that it can be used and built on, and so that it can help innovation grow. In public transit, a lot of our data is anonymized and aggregated in large numbers. So we don't really have to worry about privacy issues as well, which is great. unless you're talking about payment stuff. But just general ridership, that's great. And to the other point about like a lot of us solving for the same things, like that's where it's like this great confluence, right, of data standards and standardizing. But yeah, as public transit agencies, we're all using the roads, we're all using buses and or trains, and the problems are going to be the same that we're trying to solve. The solutions end up looking the same. We don't need to reinvent the wheel every time, just like we don't need to invent a completely new data standard for every single agency or situation out there. And I think we can lean a lot more into that, and having a centralized entity like mobility data, I think helps a lot to centralize that the conversations that are happening, to push that development forward. And I don't necessarily see that in a lot of other areas, so I'm really like grateful to see it in public transit. And I think that also plays a huge role. And I think it's, I was looking into the history of GTFS because I came into public transit just, 4 years ago, and it struck me how new a lot of this is, relatively speaking. And one of the drivers, I think, of that really has been the ubiquity of smartphones now, so people can take advantage of the data that is being published. And I love that the transit industry has really, moved with that as well, to publish real-time data that then, people need and use on the ground as they're using public transit. So I don't know if I hit everything, but that's just a lot of stuff.
This is excellent. Andreas, I see you have your hand up. You want to add something?
Yes, just I really liked what Gabriel and Nina said about sharing data. Sharing data is the key for building up an ecosystem. And like Gabriel said, it's not that the public transportation system, the travel agencies, they don't compete, they work together, they collaborate. And the better they collaborate, the better the ecosystem is working. And that's, at the beginning you asked about examples. In Switzerland, we are lucky to have a system of 250 transport agencies working together on the timetable, on the customer information, on the tariff system. And that all requires exchanging data, and exchanging data requires having standards, and having standards that propagate through the system. A very good method is making them open transport standards, open source standards, that really boosts innovation in a system like this, to our experience so far.
Great. So to that point, you have the data standards, you open source it, you do all the right things. Now you actually have to build it. So let's move on to that side of things, right? With the building, I think there is the two models. There is the model of building everything in-house, developing it within the agency. And there is the great partnership that a lot of agencies also have with contractors and software as service companies and all of that. So can you very shortly tell us about your experience at SBB with that, and which model tend to serve best, or they always work in tandem? So still with you, Andreas.
Okay. Yeah, well, we make quite a lot on ourselves in-house. We are about 1,000 IT people, and a little bit more in the operational technology. And of course, we have an extended workbench with the industry and so on. But what we really like, if it comes to innovation, is to work together with startups. We are a public company. Of course, we are a large company for Switzerland, with over 30,000 people working for SBB, which makes us a little bit slow sometimes, a little bit uninspired sometimes. So we're working together with startups. That's where the young and the fresh people have the ideas. And I sometimes say we steal with pride from them. We integrated, for example, in our SPP mobile app, quite a lot of things that were invented by startups. Of course, they get compensated. First, they get a stage where they, from one day to the other, they have access to quite the whole population of Switzerland. And of course, they get compensated in a financial way as well there. But we really like to collaborate with the startups to also in an experimental way. We have two kinds of app, for example, of customer app. One is a normal that most of people use, and one is the preview app where we can really test new features, for example.
Great. And Marcel, how's that looking like at LA Metro, the public-private partnerships in terms of developing those innovative tech solutions for transit?
Yeah, so I think, you know, as a reminder for folks, I've been with Metro for approximately a year. And I think my charge has really been supporting the team as we look ahead for the monumental task of preparing for the 2028 Summer Games. But in stepping into this role, I also inherited a small but mighty team that manages our unsolicited proposal policy. And so that was something that was established by our predecessors. Some of you may be familiar with that team, the Office of Extraordinary Innovation. And that came at a time when there was, I think we had another half-cent sales tax on the ballot. There was a lot of regional, you know, discussions about the project list, how to accelerate projects. And I think that kind of is where the UP policy was born, right? So currently we have several P3 ventures kind of underway looking at, you know, how to accelerate project delivery for our projects. But at the same time, while that was the primary goal, we also have received a number of unsolicited proposals in anywhere from like using augmented reality for bus driver training, using drones to examine like future rail facilities, you know, in right of way, to most recently piloting smart bathrooms at some of our key stations that have had, you know, significant, you know, customer experience challenges, right? And so, you know, I will drop the link in the chat so folks can look at it with more detail. But I think it really clearly establishes and signals to the private sector, hey, if you want to work with Metro, here's how you get in the door, right? We look at proof of concepts, no cost to the agency, you know, but again, I think it does, I think, provide an opportunity for first movers to really kind of work with the agency. You know, we endeavor to get responses back in a decision letter on whether we're going to pilot something within 120 days. While our team kind of manages the inflow of traffic, we quickly identify subject matter experts throughout the agency. And, you know, in some instances, they're like, you know, that doesn't really work for us, or we actually are working already actively on a solicitation, to some stuff like, well, we don't have any bandwidth, right? And I think because we have kind of a bird's eye view of the agency, we can also kind of nudge and support, and we can even do additional evaluation of the project, supporting those subject matter experts to the region if we think there's merit. And so I think to date, we've received upwards of like 280 proposals. I think 33 have been implemented, right? And so again, I think it's just a really neat way for us to signal to the private sector that we're open for business. I think we're hoping in the next probably 12 months to really kind of be more proactive and using that to meet some of the opportunities that we expect for the Olympics. But also there is, from our board, an interest in really kind of zeroing in on sustainability, decarbonization, and then also all through the lens of equity as well. And so I'll drop the link, and yeah, just excited to continue to have opportunities to meet kind of the next batch of proposals.
This is awesome, and to everyone in attendance, we will have a completely dedicated panel to decarbonizations and equity later. So stick around for that while you read the materials that Marcel's going to drop. Gabriel, so from your perspective, I think you touched on this a little bit earlier. Working with different agencies is great. You get to kind of like, share some of those experiences as well to the extent that you can, and maybe transfer some of the successes from one agency to another. You're faster, you're more nimble, you can innovate and do things, quite a bit faster than the agencies can do. So is there any particular example that you like to share with that, to see, show us kind of the power of, startups and companies that work with transit agencies in this space?
Sure. Thank you. I think it really depends on what it is the agency is trying to achieve. But in some problems or some areas of data analytics, it can be complex, and it could take a lot of time for agencies to do it in-house. And so, I like to think some agencies, maybe Swiss Railways, for example, they build their own scheduling platform. I'm not sure. But most agencies choose not to build their own scheduling platform. And that's because it's, a lot of, to do it well, you have to deal with a lot of operations research problems that, applied mathematics, things that people have been working at in universities for decades. And so it's more efficient, if you think about it from a broad social view, to for an agency to outsource those types of problems to a group of people that are specializing in that, that have dedicated themselves to only that problem. They are focusing on it. And they are developing that expertise over years, working with many different agencies, so seeing different angles. That's very hard to do in-house. I would also want to stress that it's not to say that agencies should outsource everything, because of course, as a provider of a software as a service platform for analytics, I want the agency to know what they're dealing with. It takes skilled people at the agency that have data skills, that have software development skills to understand what data we are providing to them, and to put it to good use, ideally in problems that deal with the city-specific problems, or planning scenarios that are being worked on to support decision makers at the agency. Yeah, I mean, I gave the example of the customer segmentation project earlier. Another example is our software as a service platform, our Crobato. We're cleaning, processing the vehicle location data in ways that, I should say, raw data come in with many issues, and you can spend a lot of time getting it to snuff, to the point where you can use it to make decisions, right? And that can burn out people at agencies. Agencies struggle with not only hiring but retaining talent, and it can be a little boring to work over a few years on a lot of issues with data, instead of jumping to the exciting part, which is we have this BRT corridor that we're expanding, and decision makers they need decision support, and we have all this ridership data and all this. So that's one area. Yeah, I mean, we go from processing vehicle data to modeling how riders moved, where they got on, where they got off, did they transfer, was it crowded, what was their service quality, all that. So those are all complex modeling steps that were inspired by decades of research at MIT, and those in turn were innovations that were driven by partnerships with agencies that were sponsoring the work at MIT, as it happens right now. So at Crobato, we're trying to make some of that more accessible to agencies.
This is a very nice segue to the next part, which is, again, a lot of the data that we do and we work with we know where the vehicles are, the rolling stock, we care about the passenger journeys and everything. But do we do enough in communicating that to passengers? So are we doing really enough passenger-centric information of not just telling someone that, hey, service is great, but if it's not great, effectively communicating to them, what you should be prepared for and kind of like taking the edge out of a bad experience, right? So Nina, maybe you can tell us a little bit of that on your experience of developing those front-facing interfaces with passengers. Is the innovation there up to speed? Is there somewhere where you see this going?
Absolutely. That's a major focus for us at this point. As you say, we have a lot of location data. That's great. Our biggest challenge right now is communicating the disruptions to service. And there's so many different types of disruptions on the bus side, on the rail side, and how that information gets pulled in. So like even before we try to communicate it to our riders, even being able to get it from the point of operations, finding out about the disruption and then communicating it through some sort of pipeline as data so that it can even get out. That in itself is like a huge problem right there that we're focused on. But for the data that we do have, the stuff going out, like a major recent uh innovation is the GTFS strip modifications extension. And I see Ritesh smiling. But yeah, so I love seeing that. That's gonna be a great to communicate and visualize detoured routes to riders. Of course, the next step is actually implementation and adoption in the industry by both public and private. But I think that there's a lot that's on the private side that they do great. As technology companies, they have the technical staff, the experience, and the ability to I think experiment and fail quickly and thus improve quickly that people in government are often reluctant to do because of the risk involved. We don't like to fail with public dollars. And so it's hard to do that kind of like quick iteration work that is kind of the backbone of like my world in software development. But and there's this idea too, I think, of an public entity focused on like infrastructure type products where you need to know all the requirements, everything in advance, and it's like it's built and that's it. But software technology doesn't have to work that way, and it doesn't work best that way. You want to iterate, and so anything that can foster that, I think, is useful. But in terms of that balance, like I think there's a lot that government shouldn't be in the business of building that private companies are going to do better. But we have to really be careful about where that line is, that balance is, because it is already hard enough to retain technical talent in a public transit agency, and we can shoot ourselves in the foot by not building that up internally so much, by letting that go out the door, and also by creating an internal culture where we expect that we cannot look to internal staff for that we have to look externally for that expertise. And that's very difficult because externally you're still removed from the day-to-day, from the operations, from the real problems. And we need the people on the inside who are close to the problems to also have that technical and that data knowledge. And I really love seeing MBTA actually build out a great big internal team focused on that. And I'm hoping that we could see more of that in the transit industry, because I feel like that's also going to create for better partnerships with private companies as well.
Ritesh, can you add to that a little bit also from your experience, please? Maybe in a minute or two.
Yeah, I would say like what Nina was talking about with innovating around detours. Like this was an interesting thing where it truly was a public-private partnership. This was Baltimore having an idea, which is like, hey, we use Swiftly and we use Transit app. If we enter a detour in one, can we see it in the other? And so can we actually get it? If we do all the work of entering detours, can our riders see them? And that sparked this whole thing about, okay, let's figure it out, but let's not just figure it out for Baltimore. Let's figure it out in a data standards way. That led to the creation of the GTFS trip modifications extension to GTFS real time. And the fun part of something like this is as soon as it got launched, on day one, we had Baltimore. On day three, we had 3 agencies. And then a month later, there were 10 agencies that were using the same thing. That's a core example of how innovation kind of almost like distributes itself when it goes through the public-private partnership.
This is great. And we're approaching the end of the panel. This has been a great discussion. We did not stick to the schedule I had, which sounds very on brand with the topic of the panel, but we did make it to our destination, having learned quite a lot and had a good time, which is also quite on brand. So maybe in 30 seconds each of the panelists, in no particular order, I will start with Ritesh and God, I see you on the screen. What is the role of innovation, whether it's internal within the agency, whether it's customer-centric, front-facing innovation in improving the public perception of transit? Do you see that as something that's going to improve generally how transit is just perceived, or is it also something that helps attract more talent and more people to transit? So Ritesh, I'll start with you. Give us your spiel of why we should do innovation in transit.
We should do innovation in transit because it improves the rider experience. One example is riders expect the Uber-like experience of tracking buses. And we get in our way when we think that a bus should be tracked every 2 minutes or 3 minutes, and that is good enough. Fundamental insight is there are lots of devices on a bus that emit GPS, and you can actually start tracking them much closer and give, quote unquote, the Uber-like experience. It improves the rider experience. It attracts people to actually want to solve the problem. And that's just the starting point. It gives us the blueprint in which to build more and cooler things on top of such better high frequency data.
Excellent. This is great. Gabriel.
Yeah, so I think another area is keeping track of how ridership is changing. With COVID, there were massive shifts in how people were using transit, and that's been a challenge for the transit industry. And it's going to continue to happen. There have been, Uber and Lyft had a big impact. COVID had a big impact, and there will be more things, more trends. And we're not in the world where you put out service and everybody's following this cookie cutter kind of pattern. Things are changing, they're dynamic, they're harder to understand. So it's important to innovate in the area of understanding who we are serving as agencies and to put out service that is efficient. We're also struggling to be inefficiency. So efficiently putting out service that serves those people well, that achieves that high service quality so that people can depend on it.
This is great. Nina.
One thing I would love to see more innovation in. Transit agencies are not necessarily great storytellers. So in terms of getting public support for transit projects, I think there's a lot more we can do to innovate on partnerships with local community advocacy groups that are focused on complete streets and mobility improvements, pedestrian rights, bicycling, and social justice. We have a vibrant community of these advocacy groups in Los Angeles, and they're very good at storytelling on social media platforms that reach the population. And I think that would be something really cool to tap into that isn't necessarily a technology innovation, but more of like a communication innovation that we haven't really focused on in the past.
This is awesome. And just a quick anecdote of that, Wamada earlier this year released kind of like almost a Spotify Wrapped equivalent. And I can tell that all my fellow millennials in the DMV area appreciated that quite a lot. And this is a way of telling a great story. So I really appreciate you bringing that to light, Marcel.
LA Metro also did something similar.
Nice.
And I would say that LA Metro has been doing a lot to really, step up their storytelling game. And so, just want to make sure that I put that plug in for us. I think just kind of taking a step back, right? Like we're putting it all on transit as this one thing, and it's like, it's the ecosystem, right? And so we've been piloting with the city of Los Angeles, the concept of universal basic mobility, looking at kind of a system of mobility options, right? So right now, the pilot has been focused in South Los Angeles. And so that's everything from like, you know, the concept is like that people just deserve a baseline level of like mobility and access. And so obviously Metro's back with, our belief is with transit as the backbone, right? But there's going to be certain trips that people need to drive, right? Or have access to a car, right? In Los Angeles County, you have 12 times more access to jobs if you have access to a car, right, than you do on transit. And so I think for us, it's also like an equity kind of play. And so as part of our UBM pilot, we're also providing a mobility wallet, $150 preloaded to low-income qualifying households. And we've seen the data, right? Like by far, there are more trips happening on public transit with the wallet, but in terms of spend, the majority is going to Uber and Lyft taxis, right? And in those storytelling kind of efforts where we are doing kind of long form interviews with households, it's things that you would just totally expect. You're like, my car broke down and I needed to get to work, or you know, I don't feel safe. I work the swing shift, right? And I don't feel safe taking the bus and standing for the bus at a certain time, right? And so I think it's these, you know, as transit agencies really thinking our responsibility is more around mobility, right? And I think in LA County, just because of the funding we have, because of the reach that we have, because we deliver the backbone service, really stepping in and leaning in to the other pieces, right? I think is a responsibility that we have, right? And so I think that we should have a position on data and access to data from TNCs. How do we not, right? Like we should have a position on that, right? And so I think that, you know, it's great to get information from cell phones or from INRIX or from all that stuff, but like I think it, you know, working with the state or with the federal government to have more accountability to some of the private modes out there, or the, you know, the business venture like kind of types of things, I think is critical, right? Because again, it feels like we are fighting a battle with like one hand tied behind our back on some of these instances.
Yeah, totally. And last, Andreas, you can give us just your quick take on this, and we'll conclude the panel.
Yeah, when I made my MBA in the Valley, by the way, I learned always under promise and over deliver. And innovation is really a good kind of over delivering towards the stakeholders, towards the customers. It provides them with outcomes they don't expect, and that really gives us a good relationship. Besides all the other aspects of innovation, makes us more efficient, raises quality, and so on. Having visible innovation stories improves the relationships that we have with the public, with the customers, and that's why we always work on masterpieces as well.
This is great. Thank you again. Thanks, everyone. We are on time. We did not get the chance for the Q&A from the audience, but we will collect those. I'll send them to the panelists, and we will send them back to the attendees just so that we address everyone's question. We hope we kept you informed and entertained. So join me just in thanking the panelists spiritually, since no one can really use emojis from the webinar people, for a great discussion. And I'll pass it on to the organizers for the next keynote. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Merci
Thank you.
vielmals. And we're welcoming next up Lona Hankins. We'll have a short intermission just to give a breather and give the opportunity to get some water.